Hello and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman and I am a rehabilitation psychologist here in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Washington. I also am the past director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System, and we're looking forward to Heather Barnett coming back to us soon. To just give a little context, at the SCI Wellness Summit in 2022, by the way, we're going to have one in May of 2024. We had a presentation called Accessibility Through Technology, Unlocking Universal Design, Switch Control, and Home Automation. That presentation is actually available on our website and our YouTube channel. And of course, I do want to comment that one of the wonderful presenters we had that night, Tyler Schrenk, has passed away earlier this year, and we very much miss him. But in that presentation, he did a lot and shared a lot about all the work he has done in accessibility through technology, both for himself as well as through his foundation. And so we actually met our presenter tonight through that presentation that Tyler did, because he was involved in personal robotics. And so we're grateful for Tyler, both just for everything he did as a wonderful community member, but also that he shared that with us and is going to be live throughout history on our presentations. So tonight, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Taylor Kessler Faulkner. Taylor is a postdoctoral scholar here at the University of Washington and currently leads the Assistive Dexterous Arm Project. I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm good. Her presentation is Robot-Assisted Feeding, Recent Advances and Future Directions in Personal Robotics Lab. So I turn it over to you.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the intro about Tyler, too. He's going to come up quite a few times in this talk. He is instrumental in the research at the Personal Robotics Lab. So thanks so much for attending online. For those of you who could be here in person today, thank you. I really appreciate it. As was said, I'm Taylor. I work at the University of Washington in the Personal Robotics Lab. I want to say up front that I'm representing the whole lab today and a lot of the research that we have done over the years. And so I will be talking about some research work that I wasn't directly involved with. So I'll try to answer questions as best I can about that. But if something comes up that I can't answer, I'd be happy to point you towards the researchers that can answer the questions. You'll also see slide credits because I made the slide deck with help from some of the students and other postdocs in the department. So, quick note about me, just a little bit more information. I graduated with a Ph.D. in computer science from the University of Texas at Austin in August 2022. I've been working at the University of Washington for about a year. I joined in September of last year. And my research in my Ph.D. was focused on robots learning from inattentive or incorrect human teachers. So the robots were trying to learn new things. We're working with teachers that might not be absolutely expert at teaching robots. And so now, through my PhD, up to now, one of the things that's really driven me is trying to make robotics accessible to people who can actually benefit from it, who want to use it. So both through, making robots that can actually help people, but also through making the robots that can help people easy to use, easy for people who are not robotics experts. So now I'm a postdoctoral scholar in the Personal Robotics Lab. So I work with Professor Siddhartha Srinivasa. I'm working directly on the ADA project, the assistive dexterous arm. And also just to kind of give a heads up of why it's called ADA. So 2 reasons. One, the Americans with Disabilities Act inspired the name, but also Ada Lovelace, who's often referred to as the first computer programmer. So I'm going to give you a kind of short overview of the type of computer science, the type of robotics work that I like to do. So I work a lot on HRI, or human-robot interaction. So I work on robots that are going to be around people pretty much all the time. Their entire function is to exist with and around people. And so this is a lot different than robots that operate, say, like in industry, where they're boxed off from people. They don't have a lot of interaction. And when robots are going to be around people, I really want them to blend in with the environment as much as possible. So I want people to kind of just eventually kind of accept that it's just a robot there helping them, and it shouldn't be too strange or too difficult to use. So robots that interact with people need a lot of different kind of inputs and modalities that robots that don't interact with people might not need as much. So one of these is perception. Obviously, most robots have some kind of perception, but when the inputs that can come in from people are things like voice, we can have touch from people, we can have, the robot needs to see images of people in order to interact. So that's one of the things that robots that are going to be working with people need. There we go. Robots also need a good way to communicate with people. So as we're looking at communication, this can be things like the robot can speak to a person, but it can also be something as simple as showing words on a screen, images on a screen, things like that. So the robot kind of needs some way to convey to the person what's going on, what it's doing. And then kind of lastly, we need some kind of planning. So we need the robot to be able to figure out what it's doing, whether it's driving or it's moving a hand, things like that. It needs to be able to have some way of planning what it's going to be doing next. And then we have learning, and that kind of wraps it all up together. So machine learning, artificial intelligence, these are just what we're using to kind of combine all of this communication, perception, planning, things like that into something intelligent. So kind of some of the ways that this comes up in our work with assistive feeding. In our perception, we need to be able to look at kind of images of food and be able to identify and locate things on the plate. We need to be able to look at people's faces and do things like locate their mouth for moving the arm from the plate to a person's mouth. We also need a lot of input and output from the robot. So we can do that with things like voice, like I mentioned. We can do that with through phone web applications where people can use whatever assistive technology they'd like to interact with their phone. And we can use things, we can try to use assistive technology, things like a sip and puff device to really interact with the robot and get feedback from people as it's working. And then we have our planning. So I'll kind of go into more on this image later, just a quick teaser. But while we have the robot food, the robot needs to plan to the plate to get the food, pick up the food, and then needs to plan to get from the plate to a person's mouth. So that's the quick overview. That's kind of like everything that I'll be covering in the talk, but in a couple minutes. To kind of go over and start at the beginning and talk a little bit more in detail, things about the assistive dexterous arm, or ADA. So this is around assistive feeding for people with upper extremity mobility impairments. So we mostly tend to work with people who are quadriplegic, but really this can be used for anyone with any kind of motor impairment that makes it difficult to feed yourself. So the system consists of a robotic arm mounted onto a wheelchair, and you can see that in the picture here of one of our grad students, Ethan Gordon, sitting in the chair. And Canova is a company. Canova is the maker of the robot, and they're a company that we work pretty closely with. They were really founded on the idea of making assistive tech and trying to make assistive tech accessible. And so they make quite a few arms that are very easy to attach directly onto wheelchairs, and that's one of the arms that we use, which is the Canova Jaco Gen 2. And we've modified it just a little bit so that it works for the task that we're looking for. In the one modification is, it's not really a modification, but the gripper can hold a single utensil, which is a fork in our case. And then attached to that fork, we have something called a wireless force torque sensor, and that lets us, anytime something comes in contact with the fork, the robot can feel it. So it knows what kind of forces are being exerted on the fork that it's holding and what direction they're being exerted in. And then we also have a camera attached to the arm, and this kind of gives us our perception. So we can use that to see the food, we can use it to see people, but it's all kind of coming at a robot's eye view. So it's attached to the arm, kind of above the wrist, and we can use that as the robot is moving to see what kind of items and people are in front of it. And kind of going back to that force torque sensor too, that's used for both sensing and safety. So we use it to sense things like if there's food on the plate, how hard do we need to press into the food to pick it up? But we also use it for anytime it's not trying to skewer food. If it feels any kind of force against it, it's gonna stop. And we do that for safety purposes so that anytime the fork might possibly collide with someone, it will shut itself down to avoid any danger in that kind of situation. Now, why are we working on assistive feeding? So we chose this as a North Star for our research because it's an activity of daily living that approximately, I think the last number we collected was like we read about was about 1.8 million people in the US alone need assistance with eating. In these cases, anytime people want to eat, they're going to need assistance from a caregiver or from use a system or a device that's probably not going to be very good at moving autonomously, so it might be pretty difficult to use. And so caregivers can do an absolutely amazing job here and do fantastic things for people, but some care recipients can report feeling rushed or pressured, or embarrassed, kind of just generally challenged by the lack of independence that they feel when not being able to feed themselves. So we think some of these quotes from people from our past studies in the lab really kind of sum it up. Sometimes I'm not eating or I'm barely eating because I'm self-conscious. I'd have to tell my caregiver how to do things. It would just take up all the conversation. If I can have a robot do it, it would be me feeding me, and that would be a huge deal. So that's what's motivating us to really work on this, is to try to create a system that people can use to be independent in their daily lives. And as we can see here, we know that feeding is kind of a core aspect of this daily life. And it's also time-consuming for caregivers. It's not just about the users as well. It can increase caregiver burden to be present for every meal. So hopefully, an assistive feeding robot can help both sides. So I'm going to show a quick video of the robot in action. This is kind of an older video, so it's not exactly the system that we have working today in the lab. But you can see here the robot is picking up a fork from the side of the wheelchair and picking it up. The robot's seeing the plate. We have a plate of fruit here. The robot can see and identify what kinds of different fruit are on the plate. Can go down and pick it up. That graph that you're seeing here is the force torque sensor reading, so it knows how much force is being put on it. We model coming up to the person's face, and then we can see the person's face in the video, locate their mouth, and move the carrot towards their mouth. So that's kind of the end-to-end of the system, trying to get trying to see the plate, trying to pick up a piece of food off of the plate, and then moving that piece of food to someone's mouth. And then some people sometimes ask, when we kind of present this work, why are you using a fork? Why a utensil? Why not something that's been more specially designed to work with food? So there are some systems that do things like use vacuum grippers to pick up food. So they can use suction to pick up pieces of food and release them. However, we like to work with a fork because it feels more familiar to work with. It's something that people already use every day, see being used every day. It doesn't feel so alien and different. It's just a fork that you're using to eat with. And also it's available. There's lots of commercially available, or a few commercially available systems that already use utensils with feeding. As you can see here, we have this Canova Jayco, which is often used for users can teleoperate it to move things around. That works really, really well with a utensil. And so we chose to use utensils instead of something like vacuum grippers or something different, just because it's more familiar and it's available. So there's several kind of already available systems that you could purchase if you're looking for somewhat robot-assisted feeding. And these products have helped a lot of people eat more independently, and they are a fantastic start to robot feeding. A few of them are kind of pictured on this slide here. However, a lot of times they're not used or picked up because most can't adapt to large variation or personalization because they're pre-programmed. So they execute pre-programmed actions. And so if anything changes in the environment, if the person moves, if the plate isn't exactly where it thinks it's going to be, if the user wants a bite of food that's not directly in the path that the robot's already programmed to do, it's going to be really difficult to make that happen. And especially, we've heard sometimes because it's coming to the same spot every time, there can be fatigue in neck muscles and things like that. So it's just not the end-all be-all solution to the problem. So there's lots of technical challenges involved with robot-assisted feeding, and what we're trying to do based on hearing these stories from people using the already available systems is to make something that works a little bit more autonomously, take some pressure off of the user, but can also adapt to new situations and environments and user needs and preferences. So on the one hand, some of the challenges that we have are on the manipulation side. So with robotics, that's anything that the arm is doing to manipulate objects. So the robot has to locate, identify, find the objects on the plate, and figure out how to pick them up, and then plan to move it to a person's mouth. So all of that is very technical, very robot-oriented manipulation. On the other side, we have human-robot interaction, which is, as I introduced, more my area of expertise. And that is a lot more focused on the human input and experience of that robot-assisted feeding system. So people need to have a good and easy-to-use interface to interact with the system. And eating is also a really social activity, and using a robot to eat shouldn't get in the way of having that social experience with other people. So that's another thing that HRI can be used to help solve in the future. Of course, there's lots of challenges that kind of combine both of those things, and even some things outside that don't quite fit into those realms. But we're going to be mostly talking today about a manipulation problem and an HRI problem. So I want to start with some work on manipulation that was done in the lab recently. Two graduate students from our lab, Ethan Gordon and Amal Nanavati, were the two main first authors on this work. It was going for a little while before I joined. I joined in the middle of this project, but I was able to join and be a part of it and kind of get it off to publication. And excitingly, they are presenting it at the conference this week. They're in Atlanta this week presenting the work. So this is just very recently published. So once again, just to show it in action, I'm going to talk about some of the different aspects of assistive feeding here. So we tend to refer to kind of three different phases of the feeding action when we're talking, and I'm going to be using these terms going forward. One is bite acquisition, one is bite timing, and one is bite transfer. So bite acquisition is what you see here, where the robot is using the fork to pick up a bite off of the plate. Bite timing is waiting until the person is ready to eat to hand the food over. So the robot waits until the person is ready to eat. And then bite transfer is this here, where the robot is taking the food and moving it towards a person's mouth so that they can eat. And then the goal of this work that I'm going to be focusing on now is very, very focused on bite acquisition. So we're not really going to be talking about bite timing or bite transfer. It's all bite acquisition, and it's focused on expanding the amount of food that we can pick up. So to kind of just scope this out a little bit too, we're talking about using a non-closing tool. So in this case, that's a fork. We would love to be able to do things like spoons and knives, but that is for future work, not something that we have addressed yet. But we're not using things like grippers or chopsticks or tongs or something that can close in on the food. We're looking at things that need to scoop or skewer. And then we're also looking at bite-sized or soft food. And so we can deal with any food that's been pre-cut up into somewhat bite-sized pieces. And we can deal with anything that is soft that can be scooped. Mashed potatoes, rice and beans, noodles, things like that. That doesn't have to be bite-sized, that can be scooped up. But we're not looking at things like, as you see here, a whole steak. Like, we can't deal with that. We can't cut or break off pieces of something just yet, hopefully in the future. So what are the issues with just having the robot find a piece of food and just move on top of it, down, up? Why doesn't that work for food acquisition? So you can see here that these kind of fixed trajectories really just don't work on food. So you can see here on the left side on the baseline, it's just going down, but it doesn't really have an idea how to intelligently handle food. So it picks up that egg and just gets the yolk, and the rest drops off. Here you can see it working on a carrot. It doesn't really have the intelligence, the left side, to figure out where the carrot is. It just knows that it centered the carrot and tried to go down. So it completely missed the carrot overall, right? So we want something that's going to be a little bit more intelligent, reason about the shape of the food, the size of the food, what kind of food it is, and figure out how to pick it up based on those properties. So prior to this, the kind of the state-of-the-art method that we used for picking up objects was this very small 3-action set of trajectories that the robot could use to pick up different kinds of food. So these motions change the tilt, the angle of the fork as it approaches the food. So as the camera sees the food and then the robot has to determine which one of these 3 actions to use to approach it. So we have kind of a straight up and down motion, where the fork tines are straight perpendicular to the floor. We have an angled motion, where you come in at an angle, the tines are angled. And then we also have the straight down from above, where the fork tines are angled, but the trajectory of the robot is just straight vertical. So that works for a lot of foods, honestly. Like, it works pretty well. We can do a really wide variety of basically like a fruit salad. We can do different bites of food. It can do little pieces of sandwiches pretty well. But there's also a lot of food that it can't cover. And so what we wanted to do coming into this is expand that range of foods to a bigger selection so that people can eat whatever they want coming into this project. But on the other hand, we also need to keep this that kind of small, because the really nice thing about this only being 3 actions is it's not really hard for the robot to decide which action to take if there's only 3 to choose from. So when we're trying to use machine learning, artificial intelligence, to have the robot learn what action it should be taking for each different bite of food, it's going to be easier to do if there's only 3 options to pick up food. If we give the robot 100 trajectories that it could use, it's going to start to get a lot more difficult to learn which trajectory should be used on which food item. So we want a slightly bigger set, but we want to keep it pretty small. And so to start with, what the researchers did at the beginning of this project was to collect human data. So what better way to figure out how to pick up food than to watch people do it? We're really, really good at picking up food. And so we brought in 9 participants. They each picked up 13 different kinds of food, 5 bites per food. And we have a pretty decently sized list. Things like bite-sized pieces of food like fries, broccoli, and spinach, and scoopable food like mashed potatoes, rice and beans, and instant ramen. So prior work from our lab had shown techniques that people use to pick up food, and we saw a lot of those techniques present in the collected data. So a quick note on how we collected the data going back. We have a camera watching them, and they use a special fork that has some attachments on the bottom so that we can motion capture the trajectory that they use with a fork to pick up the food. And so we're watching them, we're recording all of this data, and then we're trying to analyze exactly how people picked up each different type of food. So we had some of the qualities that we were kind of looking at for people as they were picking up the food. You can do things like twirl the food, you can scoop food, you can skewer food. Within skewering, there's lots of different techniques that people can use. One is tilting the tines to kind of increase friction on the food as you're picking it up. One is, my favorite, is wiggling, mostly because it's just fun to talk about the wiggle in a technical sense. And so when you're wiggling, that's happening inside of the food. So people will skewer the food and wiggle it just a little bit to really make sure that the food's on that fork. And then we also, there's different partial forces and things like that. A lot of what we saw was tilt and wiggle. So fun to say. And so kind of a video here of an older thing that people did for collection. You can see here the strange looking fork with the pokey bits out of the bottom. And the right top side is showing the video capture, the motion capture that was done. And we'll see it again as it plays through, but the bottom is showing the force on the food that people are putting. So we have that force torque measurement as well. So you can see here as the person's picking up the food and then feeding it to the fake head, we have that captured data of exactly how they did that. Cool. Okay, so in order to use this human data effectively for a robot, like we can look at it, we can see what people are doing, but the robot has to actually be able to use that data that's being collected. And so we have to make it make sense to a robot. So in order to do that, we kind of forced it into 3 different phases. One of those phases is the approach. So that's what's the fork doing? What should the robot do with the fork as it's approaching the food? The second is what we're terming the grasp, or the skewering action. So that's happening as the robot is skewering the food and within the food sometimes, like that wiggle that sometimes happens when people skewer. And then we have extraction. So when you're coming off the plate, you can't always just come directly off the plate because things might fall off the fork. You might have to tilt the robot and pull back. So we're looking at how people are approaching, grasping, and extracting the food. And then the human data was kind of mapped onto this schema, this three-phase schema. There's a lot of very technical details on this slide, but really all you need to take away from that is that we really just mapped that human data into that approach, grasp, extract, with attention paid to the fork velocity and orientation and different wrenches. Okay. So then we used an algorithm called k-meteoids to cluster the data. So what that means is that we have all this data, we have all of these different trajectories that we've mapped out in our little schema, which is what are people doing when they approach the food, grasp the food, and extract the food. Then once we do that, we want to kind of form groups of those trajectories. So instead of just having the robot copy each one of the trajectories so that we have however many hundreds of trajectories that we collected as possibilities, we want to group them and then kind of find the average is not quite the right word, but we want to find a representative trajectory that represents different clusters of actions. So one cluster of actions might be how people picked up rice and beans. So a scoop might give us a scoop. There might be a few different types of scooping. So what we use is something called k-meteoids, and what that means is that there's k different groups that we're trying to separate the actions into. And that k is going to give us, whatever we set k to, is the number of different trajectories that the robot can use when it's trying to figure out how to best pick up food. And so if k is too big, then we're going to see a lot of redundancy in different group trajectories. So there might be 7 different scooping actions. You probably don't need 7 different scooping actions. If k is too small, then we end up with things that don't quite cover the space effectively. So we might not be able to pick up as many foods as we would want to pick up if we have too few k. So part of it is about finding the right size of k. I won't go too into detail on how we figured out what k should be, but we ended up with 11 actions. So that means that we clustered all of these actions that we saw into 11 different representative actions. And you can see here, there's a video later where I'll show some of the food, but I'll show that in action, picking up food. But here, just a quick preview, you see each action from top to bottom. So action 0 is on the left side. You can see the approach, grasp, and extraction. And what I really want you to take away from this slide is how different the angles of that fork are when it's approaching the thing. So you can see that it's a lot of a robot gripper approaching a plate, but you can see that there's a lot of difference in the angle that the fork is approaching the plate with. Okay, so we wanted to check and see, we're like, okay, with these 11 actions, can we actually pick up the food that we want to pick up? That was the first thing we wanted to measure. So we ran an experiment to test that up. We have our robotic arm, the Canova Jaco 2. As usual, our camera, force torque, and fork are all attached to the arm. Then we set up a plate with a piece of food for the robot to attempt to pick up. We put that plate on a non-slip mat so the robot wouldn't move it too much. And we weren't really focused on vision for this, so we weren't really focused on the camera feed specifically. What we cared about was if the robot knows where the piece of food is, can it pick it up using one of these actions? So we put the piece of food on the same piece of the plate every time. Now, when we're currently working this into our system, that's not how we actually use it. We're using it with a vision system that can detect and find food and locate it. But just for this testing, everything was in the same spot on the plate. And as a reminder too, the baseline we're comparing to is just those 3 actions that I talked about earlier. And we can kind of talking about it in the same schema, so that approach, grasp, and extraction, the 3 different actions all had different approaches. They didn't really have a grasp, so there was no in-food movement. There were no wiggles, there were no tilts in the food. It was just straight to the food, go down until a certain stopping point on the force. And then all of them just did a straight vertical extraction up. So the only thing that's changing here in our baselines is the approach. So we were able to pick up almost all of the foods that we wanted to pick up above 80% of the time with the new actions. So you can see here, so ours, our new algorithm or our new actions are in red, the baseline's in gray. And then this 80% was taken from some, set based on some past data from work on how often the robot should be able to pick things up successfully in order for the robot to be considered a success. So we're really trying to hit that 80% mark. And we did it for pretty much all of the foods that we tested, except for spinach, which is very, very difficult to pick up. We were testing single leaf of spinach. It's hard for me to pick up off the plate. But it did pick it up a decent amount of the time, just not 80%. And so so we can pick up lots of foods that we couldn't before. You can see here, like noodles, there was a huge increase from the baseline, rice, fries, things like that. We can pick them up. We couldn't successfully pick them up before above 80%. But in this experiment, we handpicked the best action to pick up these foods. So we said, we kind of tested them out on the food beforehand, and we said, this one's working the best. Let's see how well that will do, the best performing action on this piece of food. So it's a little bit handpicked, right? Like we know that we can do this well on food, but can the robot figure out how to do this well on food? So that's our next experiment, is something we're calling online learning with post-hoc context. So what this does is based on some prior work from Ethan Gordon, our graduate student, on how the robot should learn what action to do when it sees food on the plate. So what this work does is use both visual data and haptic data to pick things up. Visual data is the camera feed that's coming in. It can see the food. It can locate it. And then haptic data is that force information. So what does it feel like to the robot? For example, there are things like grapes, where the skin gives it that tension, but then there's less force as you get into the center. So you can compare that, and you can use that information to say, okay, green grapes and red grapes, they look different, right? Because they're different colors. The robot doesn't know that they're both grapes necessarily. But then when you look at the force data, you go, oh, these feel exactly the same. So the robot knows that it can use the same kinds of actions to pick both of them up. So we don't have that haptic data until after we try something first, but after that we can start using that information to have the robot learn which foods might need which kinds of actions. So we can use both the visuals and that feeling of what it feels like. And from there, we were able to test that learning algorithm on all of our actions and 14 different food items. The solid thick black line that kind of stands out the most there is our 80% metric that we're trying to hit. The top line is what the best action on all of the foods could hit. And then our, what you see here in the red line is the robot learning over time. So this is it. Each round had 14 food items. We did 13 rounds. It was trying to pick up food every single time and learning from that. And we can see that after about 13 rounds, it's able to do really well. It can learn. And that's something where we can learn over the course of about a meal how to pick up the foods that you would want in that meal. So that's what we're trying to work on, is that online learning, so that if this is going out into people's homes eventually, even if it's not fantastic at picking up the food you want at first, after a meal, it should be pretty good at it. And then I'm just going to kind of show you an example of some of the actions that we learned. Here's it picking up lettuce. You can see that kind of twist that's happening inside the lettuce to make sure that all of the layers get picked up. Mashed potato, you can scoop it. I will say that our actions didn't perform quite as well with scooping things. We could only get very small bites, but it worked okay. Another try at a mashed potato. I'm waiting to get to the Jell-O because the Jell-O is my favorite. it's coming up soon. Things like broccoli are decently easy, but you have to figure out whether you're going to be, where in the broccoli it's going to be doing it. That can affect things. Okay, Jell-O, here we go. So we had these little Jell-O cups, and we cut them in half, and the robot was actually able to do that little tilt, little wiggle in there, and pick it up, approach out from the bottom, and actually pick up the Jell-O without it just sliding directly off the fork. that was probably the most fun to experiment with. Also, the thing that left my hands dyed completely red. So that was a really, we had to commit to the experiment. And that's another way you can pick it up, is with that kind of sideways action that people had. Okay, so that's kind of the summary of that manipulation work that I wanted to show. Now I kind of want to get into some of the HRI work that we've been working on recently. And so this one I am not on directly, but I have talked a lot with the people who are, and Amal Nanavati, one of the first authors on this, is a student in the Personal Robotics Lab. This is shared work between the Personal Robotics Lab, which is run again by Professor Srinivasa, and then also the Human-Centered Robotics Lab at the University of Washington, run by Professor Maya Chakmak. So this is a kind of collaboration, and the two main authors on this are Amal Nanavati and Patricia Alves Oliveira. And then this is also work that Tyler contributed heavily to. So Tyler was involved in this. He's an author on this paper. He was involved as a community researcher. And was just a huge part of this project. So thank you again for kind of talking about him at the beginning, and he's gonna show up quite a bit in the upcoming slides. So we're talking about social feeding in this context. So this part of human-robot interaction is trying to figure out how people with mobility impairments want the robot to behave when they're trying to have a meal with people. Right? Because you know, sometimes, sure, we eat by ourselves, but a lot of times we eat with people. We eat with our loved ones, we eat with our coworkers, we eat with lots of different people. There's often people there while we're eating. And a robot being able to work with someone individually is one thing, but a robot being able to still work with someone without getting in the way of social interaction is both difficult and really important. So that's what this work studies. A lot of the prior work in this area has really just focused on the functional aspects. So we're like, can we pick up the food? Can we get it to the person's mouth? And that's difficult and not solved and still fantastic to work on, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at the social component. So the question for this work is, how can we design robot-assisted feeding systems to facilitate meaningful social dining experiences for people with motor impairments? So there's a big overview here. I'm going to go through it a little more on this, but shortly presented here is kind of just like the timeline. Now, shortly after starting the project, the experimenters on this realized that they really needed the expertise of someone with motor impairments to join this project, and that's where Tyler came in. So while we as robotics researchers can bring our experience with robotics, experiments, human-robot interaction, all of that fun stuff that we have expertise in, we don't have, a lot of us lack anyways, the lived experience necessary to identify potential problems in assistive feeding and really develop solutions that can work in a real-world context with real people. And so Tyler joined the project on kind of when they realized that they really needed someone with that lived experience to join. And I believe some of you knew Tyler. He was just a huge part of the research at our robotics lab, worked incredibly closely with us, not only on this project, but on a lot of other projects, helping us design our products, giving us feedback on designs that we came up with, helping us connect to other people who were interested in the work. And so he was just a driving force behind all of this and could not have been completed without him there. So for this project, he was onboarded as what we're going to call a community researcher. So Tyler was a C1 quadriplegic and ran a nonprofit to connect people with disabilities to assistive technologies. And what he did on this project was onboarded as a community researcher, which is defined as a layperson who conducts research activities in their own community. But collaborating with community researchers is a really, really great way to make sure that we're approaching the right problems in the right way, and that we have someone with us who can really connect us to the community. So the next thing the people did, the researchers did, was create some speculative design videos. So these were videos that they came up with that kind of helped give examples of how the robot could be used in social dining situations, and what are some ways that the robot could really mess up a social dining situation. So there were 3 different scenarios that they went over. One was a family meal, one was a date dinner, one was a friend's brunch. And then they would show participants the robot behaving as intended in the situation, and then a social faux pas being caused by the robot. And so here's an example of one thing, one scene that they showed to people. So one is the robot is coming up and will feed someone when they open their mouths wide. That's one of the signals that people can use to tell the robot they're ready. So here it's working great. Our person stand in, open their mouth, the robot gave them the food. But what if they do something like yawn in the middle of dinner? Or open their mouth when they really don't want it? So here we show someone yawning, and the robot's coming in to give them food, and they're like, no, I didn't, that's not what I intended. I'm trying to think. Yep, I've got enough time. I would love to play this video and share it with you. So this is something that was created by Amal Nanavati, our graduate student, to show at the conference where this work was published and put out. And it really just shows the, a lot of the situations that can be shown. I'm trying to see if there's... Another scenario where the robot can't actually see the face that the person is trying to make. Maybe they're not noticing that the person is opening their mouth.
So as I was telling you guys, food please.
Here's the robot working as intended.
Food.
One feature that people talked about wanting to do is being able to share food with someone at something like a date night. This is a big question that we ask a lot, is where should the robot be positioned? It can be very distracting to have something right in front of your face while you're trying to talk to people. So we might want to do something like a side approach, where the robot's out of the way. So there you go. That's that's the little video that I have. I love that, just as a really kind of a great way to just show some of the scenarios that they were showing to people and asking, what do you think about these situations? How would you like the robot to behave in these situations? So the researchers interviewed participants with a variety of disabilities, lots of different ages. And each participant had at least one informal caregiver, someone who was unpaid and untrained, and then some of the participants also had formal caregivers. Some of the main challenges of current social dining experiences with a caregiver feeding them were identified as self-consciousness while eating, pressure to eat at a certain rate or a certain amount, and feeling like a burden is being placed on caregivers or fellow diners. Often the caregiver might be divided between trying to eat and feed the person, and someone might not be able to eat when they want because they don't want to distract their caregiver. Then, looking at some of the possible benefits of robot-assisted social dining, we see things like empowerment. People would be maybe less self-conscious, feel more independent. We see that the pressure would be lessened a little bit. You're feeling, less pressure to eat at a certain pace or to eat a certain amount. You might feel like belonging a little bit more in the social dining scenarios. So there's a lot of information in this paper that we could talk about, but today I'm going to be talking about just like why people liked certain robot behaviors, which were then refined into 8 different design principles for us as researchers to use when we're trying to create different systems. So these design principles are customization, which is that the robot should be able to adapt to different users' needs, context, social context, non-social context. The robot should be inclusive. That it should accommodate a user's impairments, any user's impairments. Control. The robot should defer high-level decision-making to the user. So this is showing that some users really did not want the robot to be controlling everything about the meal. People wanted control over things like timing or different things that they could customize. Another design principle is minimalism. So the robot should be compact and really part of the user's already existing assistive tech ecosystem. So as little as we can add on to that as possible is what we're trying to do. There's subtlety, which is the robot should be discreet and unnoticeable. Should really just kind of blend in. It shouldn't feel like you're feeding yourself with a robot. It should just feel like you're feeding yourself. Reliability, the robot should be consistent and error-free. Integration, the robot should integrate tasks beyond just feeding. So for example, things like being able to pour yourself a drink, open a fridge, pick up a napkin to wipe your mouth, things like that. So not just feeding focused, but things around feeding as well. And then final, interactivity, the robot should be able to interact with others, like we saw in that video, being able to feed someone at date night or being able to feed your children. Then the researchers also analyzed the technical features that we really should be trying to integrate into this kind of feeding system. And they synthesized these features into an implementation guide to make it easier for new researchers coming into the field to pick problems to start with. So the guide's presented in this graph here, and it shows each feature as kind of a bubble with the priority expressed by users on that bottom x-axis and then the technical complexity on the y-axis. So for example, a feature like customizable bite initiation is on that lower right, which means it's really important and not that technically hard to implement. So that's something that we're working on right now. And then when you are looking at something like feeding others, that's something that is pretty, users did want that kind of as a priority, but it is also very technically complex. So that's something that's a little bit more of a longer term research problem. That's more on the, we're looking out in years of work instead of weeks to months. I do want to kind of make a note on community-based participatory research, and I'm paraphrasing Amal and Patricia's insights here, so I'm going to read it off of my paper. So having Tyler involved through the research process helped them reach deeper insights. During the interviews, he was able to relate to the experiences participants shared, which encouraged them to share more. He was also able to support them beyond the topics of the interview, such as giving advice on challenges they were facing with assistive technology, which helped build and strengthen a sense of community. Finally, this collaboration challenged the academic researchers to find ways to make academic research norms and expectations more accessible. So again, a huge thank you from all of us for the work that Tyler put into this project, and I'm really glad that his presentation was able to connect us with y'all all here today. It's been fantastic getting to do this. So that kind of wraps up my work on the HRI front. In my last few minutes, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the future directions of research that we're working on in the lab at the moment. So one thing is home deployment. That's something that we're really trying to get to as soon as we can. So robots working in the lab is fantastic, and we have people come to the lab and work as participants with us to test our projects. However, it's not where the robot's going to hopefully be used long term, right? We're going to want it out in the world. We're going to want it in different environments. We're going to want it working with different people in their homes, in different kinds of situations, and without research or intervention as much as possible. So in order to do that, we kind of did a full system overhaul this summer. So we have all of our state-of-the-art robotics software on there, full implementation of pretty much all of the research that's been done on this so far. The most up-to-date versions of the research are happening on the robot in a full feeding demo. And that's hopefully, we're going to test the first iteration of that, not the final product, starting in a few weeks. We also really, really wanted to make sure that the system was going to be very, very safe if we're deploying it in people's homes. So we have an emergency stop or an e-stop that's a head press button that people can use to fully shut down the robot at any point in time. There's also the force torque sensor that I talked about. It shuts off if the fork touches anyone. And then there's also an application that we've been working with where a user can also just use the button to pause if they just want a break, but doesn't have to be emergency stopped. We also want to make sure the system's really robust, that it can work in different lighting conditions, with different assistive devices giving input to it, and with different environments and social situations. And then we also want to work on an easy robot interface. So this web application is something that we've been developing to have easy access to the robot, also with input from Tyler. And so we see here, this is a web application that can be deployed on people's phones, and they can use any kind of assistive tech that you would use to interact with your phone on a daily basis to interact with this web app that then interfaces with the robot. The other big thing that we're pushing on in the next few years is personalization. So not just having the robot be able to complete the tasks, but to have the robot be able to be customized and personalized for each possible user. So for example, one of our students, Amal, is looking at byte transfer. How should the robot configure itself when it's presenting a byte to someone? So outside of just there's the social situations that we kind of saw where maybe you don't want the robot in front of your face while you're talking to someone, but also it can be kind of intimidating. Me sitting in the seat, I don't love when the robot comes from up high with the fork down towards my face. It looks a little bit intimidating, even though I know that it's perfectly safe. And so we want to work with people to make sure that we have something that feels very comfortable, that works in different social situations, and just all around is approaching people in a manner that they enjoy. We're also looking at personalization and bite acquisition. How might different people want to eat the same plate of food? So I have lots of quirks around eating. I like to save my best bite for last. There's some things that don't want to touch. I'm like, oh, keep my potatoes away from something, right? And so these are things that we want people to be able to use the robot with. So we want people to be able to be very specific about how they're eating. So that's something we're hoping to develop in the next few years as well. And just a few quotes on customization that we saw that was collected along with that social dining study. Really, everyone wants customization, everyone wants control. And so that's what we're really working on implementing over the next few years, is making sure that that system is customizable and users can be in control of it as they want to be. And we're going to do a lot of that from things like something called preference learning, where the robot can we can show the users different ways that the robot could do something and they can express that input. But we're also just really trying to do research over the next few years into how people want to show their preferences, how people want to train the robot, how they want it to learn. And just all that to say that customization is kind of crucial to account for the diversity of user preferences, user impairments, and the environments that they might live in. And that's something that we're really, really focused on over the next few years. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all so much. And some pictures of Sid, our professor, and some of the graduate students who are working on the assistive breathing project. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's questions and getting feedback.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting and such cool opportunities. And so I'm going to just jump in because I have a question right up front of like, I'm curious about like the thinking around how this robotic arm, like I love that it would be attached to a wheelchair because then it's, there, but like for when you're not eating or when not in use, like what is the, like how tiny does it get? How much does it get put away? Where does it
Absolutely.
go? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So I have a couple of things to go for that. One is directly answering the question. So there is kind of a folded up position that we can put the arm in. So it tucks itself. It does still come out to the side of the robot a little bit, but it is fully tucked down below the arm of the wheelchair. So it shouldn't interfere with anything above the arms. But it's still like it's a big arm, like it's not super compact, and so two things. One is if people want the robot on their chair all the time, we want them to be able to have it because that Canova arm can not only be used for things like our feeding project. If you take the fork out, it can be used for opening doors, any kind of manipulation you want to do around the house. Canova provides a teleoperation interface to work with the arm. So some people might just want the arm on their chair all the time. But in the off chance they do not, we want to make it as easy as possible for caretakers to remove from the chair. Yeah, and we're also looking at things like what if people want to eat in bed and they're not in their wheelchair? So we're also looking forward to that of how can we attach it to, say, a bedside table or things like that.
Idea, what else?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the first question was on, seems like it could be a kind of long, tedious research process. How does this compare to some of the other areas of robotics research we do? Honestly, it's pretty similar, I would say. The thing that really makes it stand out from some of the other robotics research that the lab does, I would say, is the human side of things. And that's the part that I love the most, and I think it's really fun to work on, making sure that the people are actually going to like the robot and want to use the robot and be able to use the robot well. I don't think it takes a long time. Don't get me wrong, it is a painstaking process, but that's kind of just robotics research, I would say. Things take a little bit longer. Everything's happening in the real world, not in simulation, so you really have to iterate over and over and over again to get something that works well. And then the second question is what kinds of, like how many different areas and areas of study are people involved in the project? So we do have a lot. So in our lab, just our lab, I would say, we have people with lots of different kinds of expertise. We have people who have expertise in human-robot interaction. We have people who are fantastic coders. We have people who are great at building things. We have people who are really good at electrical engineering. So we have all of that going in, but we also do things like we are forming a partnership with the Taskar Center at UW to get in, feedback from people who are more used to working with people with disabilities, really get a lot of help from them on running our studies and interfacing with people and making sure that we're doing everything that we need to do to make it a great experience for everyone to be involved in the research progress. And then I would say that the HRI side, there's always just a little bit of psychology that pops into it too. We're not working with anyone, I don't think we're working with anyone specifically right now who has that as a focus, but it's something that we all are very interested in and try to bring into the work is reading a lot about human behaviors and human desires around robots.
Talking about like the human-robot interaction, and I know you talked about how the robot learns and personalizes it after kind of having a meal. What's the process for like the user? How user-friendly is it? Is it difficult to kind of get used to, those techniques of using the robot when eating?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say the learning that I showed here that was happening on the bite acquisition side hasn't been tested with lay people in the chair yet. So that's something that I don't have a lot of data on to give you. But I will say that this is something that we're we're really working on, we're really looking at, we're really trying to figure out how easy this is to work with. There's some previous work from a prior postdoc in the lab, Topo, who it's called Is More Autonomy Always Better? And so this is something where we're really, really trying to take his takeaways from this and apply it to ours. And what he found was that some autonomy, so the robot being able to do things by itself, learn things by itself, things like that, some of that is desirable in the robot system. People don't want to teleoperate the robot to do every little thing because that gets really tedious. On the other hand, people do want some control over what the robot is doing. So they want to be able to intervene. There's some things they want to be able to tell the robot when they want to take a bite and not have the robot just try to guess when they want to take a bite, things like that. And so we're really trying to walk that line, that balance of what should the robot be learning and how tedious is it for people in the chair while the robot's learning versus how much do they want to have control over it. So that's, I didn't really answer your question, but it's something that we're working on very closely right now. Yeah.
When do you envision this might be out for some home trials at least, or home use?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For just being like available for anyone to have, I think it's going to be some years. That's way out. Now we are starting to think about recruiting people for home trials of our kind of beginning system, and that's happening over the next year. Like we are currently looking for people to test in home. It's not quite ready to do that yet, but it's getting really close. So we're hoping to, over the next year, really start doing those home trials and building up the experience and learning from the people who we can deploy with and trying to make it better and better and better so that we can eventually get a product that anyone can use, and it's just a fully packaged system. Right now, pretty much everything we have is open source, and so we try to kind of share the knowledge as much as possible, but there's, of course, a lot that's still private within the lab just for research purposes. But
If people wanted to participate in your research, what should they do?
Absolutely. So we send out, we do send out kind of calls for participation in research every once in a while. Absolutely, you can just contact us if you have any interest in taking part, or even just coming to see it, right? Like we are always happy to have people come to the lab and just show them how the chair, the arm works, how everything functions. So that's something that you can always reach out to me about. I don't know if my contact information is shared through somewhere.
If it's on your slides, it will be? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll connect you.
Yeah.
And if you have a call for research, let us know, and we can put it
Absolutely.
out to our listserv as well.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Yeah, we're just trying to kind of connect with as many people who might want to use the product as possible, and so we can get input. We love getting both positive and negative feedback on what's going on because we want to make the product as good as possible.
Yeah, and I realized that I was talking to Chris across the room. If people want to reach out to us, Northwest Regional, we can connect you. That's not an issue. Somebody thinks they may have missed some of it, but could you share a little bit more about safety considerations to avoid potential or unintentional harm, particularly with things like a fork, which
Absolutely.
could potentially do some damage if it was accidental or whatever?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have several safety systems that are in place, and we're always looking for more to add. We want to make sure that this is as safe as possible. So the systems that we have set up right now there's that force torque sensor that's attached to the arm, and that is anytime there's any kind of pressure on that fork tip on the tines, the robot will feel it. And if it's not currently trying to pick up a piece of food, it will stop. So really any-time that it could possibly run into you, and I've tested, we test this all the time. We put our hands in front of it, we try to stop the robot at any point in time. It will just stop itself if it runs into someone. We also have an emergency stop button that right now it's set up as a head array so people can press the button with their head to stop it. That completely shuts the whole system down. and the robot will stop moving. And then we also are, in the app that we're developing, we have a pause button. So in case the robot isn't necessarily close to you, but you're feeling concerned about it might knock over a glass or something like that, but it's something that's not necessarily an emergency, you can press that pause button with whatever assistive device that you are using to interact with your phone, and the robot will pause, but then resume movement if and when you decide it's good to go. Yeah, absolutely. So we have grants from NSF, ONR. The NIH is always really, really interested in funding these types of things. And then we also work directly with Canova Robotics, and not for funding, but just for exchange of products and connecting with different users. So I'd say there's really a lot of interest in funding for robot-assisted feeding. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this, and it's such interesting, and we'll look forward to another few years and having you back and getting the next one and go from there. I think these are the kind of things that just are so important for us to learn about and hear about, and I know that there'll be people who would be interested in participating with you as well. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.